think it's fairly easy to let life pass you by. One day, you're 7 and chasing your siblings around the backyard, sporting grass-stained knees and a slight sunburn. And the next, you're starting college, and then you blink and you're getting married, or raising a family, aiding your sick parents, or sitting at the end of your own life thinking, when did life start moving so fast? If we're lucky, we'll experience something in life that forces our brains to slow down and question the passage of time, forces us to stop and evaluate our lives lived thus far and how we want to live moving forward. For me, this moment came earlier this year when my dad had a heart attack.
Right? Second half or 4?
5. 5 breakfast, second half.
Oh, they're an extra.
So these need to go, I think, somewhere on the top of the outside of the egg.
My dad and I are avid hikers. We have quite a few long distance trails under our belts and thousands of kilometers covered between the both of us. Though we've been successful in completing several hikes, the Sunshine Coast Trail has been a bit of a black spot in our hiking history. British Columbia's Sunshine Coast Trail is a 180-kilometer backcountry hiking trail that stretches from Sarah Point in Desolation Sound to Saltery Bay. Established and maintained solely by volunteers, the trail links the remaining stands of old-growth forests in the region. The route traverses diverse landscapes, from coastal shorelines and lakes to old-growth forests and expansive mountain tops. The trail is dotted with over a dozen huts, making it Canada's longest and free hut-to-hut hiking trail. Dad and I attempted to hike the Sunshine Coast Trail in 2021. Our itinerary was too tight, and because of that, we didn't finish. Though we loved our time on the SCT, it always felt unfinished. Since our first attempt, we've dreamt of going back to try again, but the timing just never seemed right. After my dad's sudden heart attack, our motivation shifted. Instead of letting fear hold us back from new adventures, we embraced this reminder that life is too short to leave things unfinished. And so, we made our way back to the Sunshine Coast Trail. Returning to the Sunshine Coast Trail felt incredible. Memories of our previous attempt flooded back, and we looked forward to seeing that cool tree or returning to that lake for a swim.
Get me out, get me out, get me out! Get me out of here!
Everything felt familiar, yet each experience was new. Every step on our first day was charged with anticipation and excitement for the coming days. We were gonna finish this thing.
Your eyes look so puffy.
It's because you are puffy. Sliammon Lake, 24 kilometers.
Hiking always reminds me of how incredible my short time on Earth is. The rhythm of hiking is simple. I awake when the birds tell me it's time to get up. I eat when I'm hungry, drink when I'm thirsty. I stop to eat the berries and look at the flowers and smell the air because my brain tells me that for some reason, It's fascinated by these seemingly small moments. It feels like existence in its most raw form, and it's beautiful. It's a type of life my dad also loses himself in. Throughout our hike, he'd stop often to touch the bark of a tree, or stare up at the canopy, or count the rings on old stumps. It's the small things, like laughing at funny-looking mushrooms and appreciating the beams of light filtering through the trees, that make our lives so uniquely beautiful.
It's actually been weird how you'll say things, and I'm like, I was literally thinking that right now.
What can I say?
Same brain.
Chip off the old block. This is haywire. Yeah. So I believe it's here. It's forking. Or we gotta sit here in charge. Sit here.
I've spent some of the most formative moments of my life with my dad. It's during those times, typically with a pack strapped to my back and trail beneath my feet, that I've come to discover myself. I've had the chance to ask big questions and have meaningful reflections with my dad by my side. We've unpacked personal traumas while surrounded by the warm forest air, sat in silence atop mountains, reflecting on the beauty of life itself, and we felt both frustration and relief while soaking our tired feet in cold streams. We've faced and overcome nearly every obstacle in our path. Each day on trail would come to its inevitable end, with us lying in our sleeping bags, feeling depleted, yet so thankful for the experiences we just shared. Sure, the next day on trail was made up of the same basic things like waking up and walking, but each day offered its own horizon to chase, its own lessons to be learned.
It's working. Well, listen to that go. Woo-hoo-hoo.
Warmth. On the Sunshine Coast, I refused to let the days blur into one. Each day was important in its own right.
You dare to cross paths with me. Get your water now, because your thirst will be unquenchable. Trust me.
Having learned from our first attempt, Dad and I budgeted a few extra days to hike the entire trail. This extra time allowed us to hike at a slower pace and truly enjoy the trail without feeling rushed. But I want to be clear, just because we had more time didn't mean the hike itself was easy. The Sunshine Coast Trail tested our limits. What began as a beautiful hike in the rain quickly turned into several days of wet socks and damp gear. The constant dampness led to lingering frustration, making the steep ascents even more grueling.
I'm thinking about t-shirt or no t-shirt.
Probably a t-shirt. It's only up from here.
That means no shirt because I'm not digging all the way in my bag to the bottom.
Okay.
At the time of starting our second attempt, it had only been 9 months since my dad's heart attack. He was still waiting to undergo a procedure that would essentially get his heart back on track. But just a week before we started, he was experiencing some complications that made him nervous about the hike. These complications carried over into our trek, and his rapid and irregular heart rate made it difficult to tackle the steep climbs. The ascent to Tin Hat Mountain, the hardest climb on the trail, nearly broke him. He couldn't seem to settle into a rhythm like he normally could. I got ahead of Dad and gave him some space, rarely looking back to see where he was at. I thought maybe he wouldn't want me to see him struggling, but the more I thought about it, I realized that I didn't want to see him struggling. Reaching the top of what's supposed to be the most iconic spot on the trail didn't feel like a celebration. It was more of a sense of relief mixed with a slight bit of dread for the coming days. The hardships of the previous day bled into the next, both mentally and physically. Dad was struggling. Despite the reassurances from his doctors, he began to doubt whether continuing the hike was safe. I remember us sitting on a log, staring out at the forest in front of us. We sat in silence for a moment before I told Dad that I'd understand if he needed to cut the hike short. We both held back tears as we contemplated the gravity of the situation. We asked ourselves difficult questions like, should I continue while Dad stops at the next exit point? What would we do if he came into some serious trouble? These questions were uncomfortable, not because they suggested we might not finish, but because they forced us to confront the reality of Dad's health and safety. It was hard to see my dad, who I had always perceived as a pillar of strength, now facing the limitations of his own body. We ultimately decided to slow down, taking as much time as we needed on the ascents, and focus on maintaining any sort of stability. We would take things day by day, moment by moment. That's all we could do.
A minute ago we heard the nest of the small ones and they're quiet now, but we don't know where. Mom's telling us to back off. There's another one right there. 2 of them. Right.
Once we decided to slow down and take things moment by moment, everything began to change. The sun came out, the earth dried up, and the possibility of making it to the end together felt real again. The sunshine boosted Dad's morale, and he felt strong enough to tackle the upcoming climbs. It was amazing to see the transformation. It was such a stark contrast from the day before, and I couldn't have been more stoked.
That guy, girl, hold up and stuff.
got 1,000 meters to go. We're getting her done.
I used to be consumed by the idea of being forgotten. Not in the sense of loneliness, but in the sense that in 100 years, no one would know that I ever walked this earth. I would find myself overwhelmed with thoughts like, what's the point? And does any impact I make even matter? While these may seem like small, trivial questions, they often left my mind spiraling. In the end, when I eventually pass, my impact might last for a few years, maybe a decade, maybe even 50 years, but it will eventually fade. And you know what? That's okay. What matters is this moment, and the moment that will happen 2 minutes from now, and those moments Dad and I spend sitting next to our cook stoves, waiting for our dehydrated meals to cook, joking around about things of no significance, and enjoying the simple fact that we're together. That's what matters. Holding the ones you love close, enjoying each day as it comes.
It sounds like a bag of Doritos being squished.
Bag of Doritos.
But you know what I won't forget throughout this short life of mine? Tackling the longest climb on the Sunshine Coast Trail with my dad. We took our time and chatted the whole way up, and even though it took us a long 5 hours to get there, every single moment was enjoyable. Nothing compared to the absolute joy on my dad's face when he reached the summit. I was so proud of him for overcoming everything that stood in his way, and felt just so incredibly thankful to share that moment with him.
Hear the commotion, and that's okay.
I remember the morning of our last day on trail. Dad descended to the lake for one final swim while I packed up and began my slow journey down the trail. I hiked alone for most of the morning, surrounded by peaceful stillness. The bugs respected my space and the forest was quiet. Only the sound of birds above the trees and the occasional trickle from a nearby stream broke the silence. Sunlight filtered through the trees and the warm rays beamed down on my face. The vibrant green of the moss and the ferns and the leaves surrounded me, and the ground was soft beneath my feet. In that moment, everything felt perfect. As I got closer to the ocean, I could smell the salt water, and tears welled up in my eyes from an overwhelming sense of contentment. Our adventure was coming to an end, which felt bittersweet. Sad, yet incredibly satisfying. We had overcome so much, and we were finally nearing the end of this goal we had held for several years. Who would have thought that a heart attack would lead us back to the Sunshine Coast Trail? Dad's heart attack was a powerful reminder that life really is short, and this hike reinforced the importance of cherishing the small moments. Swim in every lake, look at the trees, feel the breeze on your face, smell the ocean air, dry your feet in the sun, do the things you love with the people you love. Our journey on the Sunshine Coast Trail has been a reminder of the strength we find in each other and the adventures that we still have ahead of us. It taught us to savor every step, every view, and every moment spent together. I walked away from this trail with a deeper understanding of myself and my dad, and a renewed appreciation for the simple joys in life.
You can see the fish!
Oh, yeah, there you go.
That is so awesome!
Before I know it, and if I'm lucky, I'll be old and nearing the end of my own life. I want my body to be tired and depleted from all the places I've explored and the experiences I've had. My bones will creak and my skin will be weathered, but those will be the marks of a life well lived.
Yeah, I can.
Sweet.
Oh.
Because that's what it's all about, right?